I like this expression, the GDP economy. I think that's useful because, of course, care work, it has as a value, not just an emotional value, it has an economic value, which is really quite high. If you actually added up how much one would have to pay to replicate the work that a stay-at-home mother does, for instance, it would be very expensive to employ someone or employ multiple people in reality to do what she does. So it is a valuable thing. But yes, it's not actually accounted for. I think you describe it as a one-time boost to GDP, this mass entry of women into the workforce. Of course, there have always been women working in one way or another. But the thing that we see in the second half of the 20th century, which I guess is historically peculiar, is middle class, relatively affluent women moving into the labour market when they hadn't been there before, at least, or hadn't been there for a long time. I mean, yeah, I suppose talk through a little bit that historical shift. What happened in the second half of the 20th century, which has been so historically unusual?
As you say, women have always worked both inside the home and outside the home, but there was the famous rupture with the Industrial Revolution, where the economic function left the home with men. That this was then, women. I mean, obviously, some work, both domestic and economic, GDP economic, went on in the home, but the home became less the centre of economic production. There was a period from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century, this rather unusual period where many women, particularly middle-class women, were not productive in the GDP economy. But that then ended from the sort of the late 50s to today. The female participation in the labour market went from sort of 25%. I mean, full-time participation went from sort of 25% to just over 70%. Now, we tend to think of that as a sort of simple, addition to the sort of plus side of the balance sheet, and we never look at what was lost. We kind of assumed that women were sitting at home twiddling their thumbs, and of course that wasn't the case. I mean, women were not only looking after children and old people and men. They were also at the centre of community life and running charities and so on and so forth. At both ends of the social spectrum. You're the kind of image of the East End working class matriarch, or these sort of county ladies who were also JPs and so on and so forth. There was a huge amount going on, which stopped when, partially stopped when you had this huge movement of women from the domestic realm into, as it were, sort of following men out into the GDP economy. And now, obviously, that's had enormously beneficial. The fact that our GDP economies have access to the brains and energy of women in a way that it didn't. Before, say, the 1960s, the 1970s is a massive thing, but we seem incapable of kind of looking at the other side of the balance sheet. And a lot of what I'm talking about in this book is a sort of trade-off between the GDP economy and kind of well-being. I had intended to sort of go more into the whole sort of GDP question, but actually there isn't really a huge amount you can say about it, except that it would be, we could have alternative statistics that do try to capture, as indeed they already do to some extent. I mean, GDP figures themselves do try and capture some of the of the work that's done in the domestic realm, but we do kind of need we need a better handle on all of this to give us a more honest and accurate picture of what's happening, because I mean we're so over focused on GDP, and I think it so distorts our kind of debate about economy and society. And I mean, even now, I mean, the treasury model is all about boosting GDP, which is all about increasing employment, whether it's through mass immigration or through pushing women back into the workforce as soon as they've had babies, often against their will. But look at the numbers. I mean, we're already way above average for the OECD countries. We have our labour market participation rate is, I think, about 75%. Women are slightly lower than men. But that's well into the upper quarter of OECD countries, and we're obsessed by pushing it even higher. But so many countries have lower labour market participation rates, but much higher economic growth, much higher productivity. Indeed, you could almost say there's a sort of reverse trade-off. But you push low productivity people who are probably rather reluctant to be there, like recent mothers, into low productivity jobs in the GDP economy. I mean, it's which kind of superficially increases GDP, but doesn't actually boost per capita growth very much. We're also obsessed by the inactivity rate. And again, the inactivity rate is actually below the average for rich countries. It's also below the level that it's been. It's below the average level that it's been in the UK in the last 30 or 40 years. Now, there has been a big increase in inactivity as a result of chronic illness, and obviously, I'm sure we'll go on and talk about this. I mean, the sort of the whole epidemic of mental fragility problem, and governments are right to focus on that. We're over focused on the wrong things, I think, and so you end up with people apparently, according to the national accounts, as it were, we're all richer, but actually we feel, and particularly women doing the double shift, feel much more stretched. And you can have rising GDP and falling well-being, and I think we need to try and think more clearly about that.
And famously, female self-reported happiness has dropped over the exact same period that female economic freedom supposedly has increased. Just thinking again about why the government, at least in Britain, seems intent on increasing the labour market participation of mothers of young children, is part of the reason also baldly that you get more tax revenue, right? So if you have two parents who are working and they're also employing a nanny, a childminder, a nursery worker, or whatever, you have three people paying income tax and NI. Whereas if you just have the stay-at-home mum and the breadwinner, you get one lot of tax. Do you think that's part of what's going on?
Yes, I think that is part of it. As you say, that it's the sort of 3 for 1. I mean, in the old breadwinner homemaker model, you had one man working and one woman at home. Now you have three people contributing to the GDP economy: the man, the partner woman, and the child carer. And it is true that that boosts tax income to some extent, but it also boosts costs to the state. I mean, the kind of welfare costs to the state, and often, I mean, the child carer will be paying very little, if anything, in tax. The woman, particularly if she's working part-time, may not be paying a huge amount in tax. And it's in some ways a kind of it's a sort of false economy. I mean, look at the latest increase in childcare subsidy. So we currently spend about £4 billion a year on childcare, with the 30 hours a week for children of 3 and 4, and some children of 2, if they're from disadvantaged homes. We're now expanding that to, at the cost of another 4 to 5 billion to children from 9 months old, despite the fact that a lot of people in child development will say that extended childcare for a child under 2 is really not a particularly healthy or advisable development. But we're spending an extra £5 billion on that extension of the childcare subsidy, and according to the OBR, or is it the Treasury estimates? I can't remember what estimates that I've seen. This will create an extra 60,000 jobs. I mean, for the kind of the subsidy per job is, runs into the hundreds of thousands, I think. I mean, this is not an even an economically rational thing to do from the point of view of expanding the GDP economy. Um, and I think a lot of it does have to do with a kind of anti-domesticity bias in our public policy. Um, and and this is something that that kind of high status professional men can identify with high status professional women who think like them about work. But there are millions and millions of women who have very different ideas about that, and the government indeed tells us this through the Department for Education childcare surveys that they do every year. They don't publicise this aspect of it, but they ask people what their ideal arrangements are, and the ideal arrangements are for many for many women that have to go out to work even when children are preschool. The ideal arrangements, I think, is like 2/3 of women who currently go out to work with preschool children would prefer to work fewer hours, and 1/3 would prefer to work not at all. And actually, if you do, now it's true that some of those who are currently at home, I mean, around a bit less than 20% of parents, mainly mothers, are stay-at-home parents with preschool children, and some of those, if they had affordable, decent childcare, would take advantage of it. But if you kind of do the sums, that the number of full-time, mainly stay-at-home mothers would rise from about 20% to about 40%. And we never hear anything about that. Yeah, I mean, I think there is this sense amongst politicians that still there's something old-fashioned and backward-looking about the domestic realm.
Low status.
Low status, that and men are doing a good job by helping women follow them into the public realm, and turning their back on these sort of traditional female areas of of expertise and status.